Have you ever seen a situation spiral out of control before anyone even has a chance to step in? That's exactly the kind of energy people are talking about when they describe this love and hip-hop Atlanta moment. Now, to be clear, everything being discussed here is based on online reports, fan reactions, and circulating claims, not confirmed facts. Still, the story has spread quickly because of how intense it sounds. According to what's being shared online, a heated situation involving Bambi, Mendeecees Harris, and Yandy Smith allegedly took a very uncomfortable turn. Some reports suggest things may have gone further than anyone expected in that moment. The incident is said to have started with an unexpected accusation, something that reportedly caught everyone off guard, especially since it happened in front of others and possibly cameras. Witnesses claim Bambi spoke very directly, and what she said instantly changed the mood in the room. People describe it as one of those moments where everything just goes silent. The kind of silence where nobody knows what to say or do next. From there, the tension reportedly started building fast, second by second, as everyone tried to process what had just been said. Again, none of this is confirmed, but that hasn't stopped the story from spreading widely online and getting people talking. Although the exact details are still being debated and nothing is confirmed, different accounts suggest the situation quickly became more intense. Some say Mendeecees Harris's body language shifted noticeably. Others claim voices were raised, and a few even believe things may have briefly turned physical. What most people agree on is that emotions were running extremely high, and control in the room seemed to slip at that moment. Yandy Smith's reaction, according to reports, surprised many viewers. Sources describe her as visibly overwhelmed, caught between standing by a loved one and processing what had just been said. Instead of stepping in immediately, she appeared to freeze for a moment, trying to take everything in. Fans now say she looked like she was close to breaking down as the situation escalated around her. The biggest question people keep asking is simple. What really happened in that room? And why are there so many different versions of the same event? Even before anyone spoke, the atmosphere reportedly felt heavy. People had gathered, cameras were rolling, and conversations were quiet but tense. According to those present, it was obvious something serious had been building in the background. Eye contact was avoided, and the tension in the room made it clear that a confrontation was likely. At one point, Mendeecees was said to be leaning back, trying to stay composed, but observers noticed a change in his expression as things unfolded. Bambi, on the other hand, was described as sitting with a very serious look, something deeper than frustration, as if she had been holding back emotions for a long time and finally decided to speak up. Yandy Smith was also present nearby, and even she reportedly seemed to sense where the conversation was headed before it fully erupted. Nearby, Yandy Smith was said to be caught in the middle of it all. Reports describe her shifting her attention between both sides, trying to read the room and figure out how things might unfold before it went too far. At one point, Bambi reportedly broke the silence, and the shift in energy was immediate. Even if she didn't start off loud, her words were strong enough to make everyone pause. The room, which had been tense already, seemed to lock up completely. Mendeecees let out a slow breath and shook his head slightly, but nobody stepped in. People around them were said to be frozen, with only small movements and quiet whispers breaking the silence. Mendeecees responded in a controlled tone, but there was tension underneath it. According to those describing the moment, his jaw tightened as he spoke, making it feel less like a casual reply and more like a warning wrapped in calm. Bambi didn't back down. She leaned forward, locked in on him, and raised her voice just enough to cut through the tension. "No, don't do that," she reportedly said, making it clear she wasn't letting the moment slide. She followed it with a direct statement, insisting he knew exactly what she was referring to. The mood in the room shifted again instantly. People who have discussed the scene online say it felt like everyone realized at the same time that things were heading into serious territory. Mendeecees then responded with a sharper tone, warning that it was becoming a dangerous game. His calm presence seemed to fade as emotions rose on both sides. Even the camera crew, according to reports, appeared to pause in the moment, as if trying not to miss what would happen next. At that point, he reportedly leaned forward to match her energy, and the space between them felt even more intense, with everyone in the room fully aware that the situation had escalated beyond just words. Yandy Smith reportedly stepped in again at this point, trying to calm things down before they escalated further. She raised her hand slightly, as if asking for space and control over the moment, and spoke in a strained but softer tone, suggesting that this wasn't the right place for the argument to continue. But Bambi didn't agree. She quickly shook her head and pushed back, insisting that this was exactly the right moment and place. According to the reports being shared, she made it clear she was tired of people acting like they didn't know what was really going on. Her words about silence stood out the most, with observers saying that line hung in the air and changed the mood even further. It wasn't just about one situation anymore. It sounded, to many in the room, like she was pointing to something bigger that had been ignored for a long time. Mendeecees' expression reportedly shifted again, this time more clearly than before. People who described the scene later said this was the point where a regular disagreement started feeling much heavier and more personal. The atmosphere in the room tightened, and people became visibly uncomfortable as things escalated. He responded in a firmer tone, warning that words like that couldn't just be thrown around without consequences. That shift in tone added even more tension to the exchange. Bambi, instead of backing off, reacted almost like she was shocked by that response. She repeated his point in a sharp, almost sarcastic way, questioning the idea of repercussions after everything that had already been said. At that moment, according to those discussing the incident online, it was no longer just a heated conversation. It had turned into a full emotional standoff, with everyone in the room aware that things were getting harder to control. Where was that energy? Bambi reportedly asked at this point, keeping her focus locked in. Yandy Smith, according to those describing the scene, looked visibly shaken. She brought her hands together as if trying to steady herself and kept glancing between both sides. In a soft but strained voice, she pleaded for them to stop, saying, "Please, both of you. This is getting out of hand." But by then, most people in the room already felt it had gone too far. The tension wasn't just in what was being said anymore. It was in how everyone was acting. People leaned forward, then pulled back, voices rose and dropped, and no one felt confident enough to fully step in and take control. Bambi then reportedly stood her ground and said, "I said what I said," in a calm but firm tone, as if she had reached a point of no return. Viewers who discussed the moment online said it felt like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. She continued, pushing the point further and challenging the reactions around her, insisting she wasn't making anything up and standing by her words. At that moment, Mendeecees reportedly rose halfway from his seat. Even that small movement changed the energy in the room immediately. People reacted as if something bigger was about to happen. He told her to calm down, speaking in a lower but more serious tone, warning that she was crossing a line that couldn't easily be taken back. Bambi didn't move, responding that maybe the line had already been crossed. According to fans and online discussions, this was the peak of the tension, the moment where no one in the room could tell how far things might go next. At that point, control in the room seemed to be slipping away. Some people claim they noticed a sudden movement, while others say it may have just been the camera angle or the chaos of the moment making things look more intense than they were. Either way, the focus of most discussions online has been Yandy Smith's reaction during those final moments. She reportedly stood still for a moment, appearing unsure whether to step in or hold back. Observers describe her as visibly overwhelmed, trying to process everything at once. Emotionally, she seemed caught between loyalty, shock, and concern, and it showed in her expression. Eventually, she moved forward and raised her voice, reportedly saying, "Stop. Just stop," as she tried to step between the two sides. In that moment, she attempted to physically calm the situation and bring things to a halt, saying, "This isn't how this is supposed to go." But by then, the atmosphere in the room had already shifted completely. The sense of calm was gone, and everything felt uncertain. That single moment became the main focus of all later conversations, with people still debating what actually happened and how it should be interpreted. Some believe it went too far, while others think parts of it have been exaggerated or misunderstood. What most agree on, however, is that the confrontation left a lasting impact on everyone present. When Yandy stepped in between them, there was a brief pause, but it wasn't calming. Instead, it felt heavier, like the tension only tightened. Bambi reportedly didn't step back or lower her voice. She stayed locked in, focused and unmoved, as if she had already committed to seeing her point through no matter what. In a calm but firm tone, she pushed back against the idea of stopping things at that moment, making it clear she didn't feel the situation could just be shut down so easily. Bambi reportedly continued in a firm tone, saying that real issues are often ignored when they first come up, which only added more weight to the conversation. Yandy Smith, clearly overwhelmed at this point, shook her head and responded that things couldn't continue like this. With a slight tremble in her voice, she insisted, "This isn't the way to do it. You're going too far." Bambi gave a dry laugh, not amused, but frustrated, and pushed back, questioning whether she was really going too far or simply saying what others were afraid to admit out loud. That comment reportedly shifted the mood in the room again. People exchanged uneasy glances, some looking down while others leaned in slightly, trying not to miss a single word. According to viewers discussing the moment online, this is where the situation moved from a simple argument into something much deeper and more personal. Mendeecees Harris then stepped forward again. His posture reportedly became more firm and direct. While he didn't immediately raise his voice, there was a noticeable edge in how he spoke. He warned Bambi to be careful with her words, saying she wasn't only speaking about herself anymore. Bambi responded right away, making it clear that was exactly her point, that she wasn't speaking only for herself. At that stage, the tension reportedly intensified even further. It wasn't just about what was being said anymore, but about what the words were pointing to beneath the surface. Things people in the room may have understood but had never openly addressed. Yandy then moved closer again, raising her hands slightly as if trying once more to calm everything down before it escalated any further. Yandy reportedly tried once more to keep distance between both sides, standing in a way that prevented them from getting any closer. By this point, emotions were running extremely high, and even the atmosphere in the room felt heavier with every exchange. She pleaded again, her voice sounding more urgent, saying that this couldn't continue in this way. Not here and not like this. But Bambi, according to accounts being shared, was no longer reacting to the attempts to calm things down in the same way. Her focus remained locked on Mendeecees, and she insisted that she wasn't making anything up or exaggerating what she believed was happening. Mendeecees, for his part, reportedly shook his head and took a steady breath, trying to stay composed. He responded that it wasn't something he had just made up either, and suggested that what was being said was becoming reckless and unfair, with no consideration for how it affected others involved. Bambi reacted immediately, repeating his words in a pointed way that made the tension even sharper. According to viewers discussing the scene, this was one of those moments where everything feels like it pauses, and even small movements seem noticeable. At the same time, Yandy's expression reportedly changed again. People in the room were shifting uncomfortably, with some looking away entirely as if they didn't want to be part of what was unfolding. Yandy appeared visibly emotional, pressing her lips together and struggling to hold herself together as her eyes began to well up. She reportedly said she didn't like where things were heading, her voice strained, as she tried once again to bring the situation back under control. Yandy reportedly muttered that the situation was already getting out of control, even as she tried to steady herself. Bambi quickly responded, insisting that it had already gone too far. At that point, the energy in the room shifted again. People in the background began reacting more openly, some murmuring, others asking what was happening, as the tension continued to rise in layers rather than one single outburst. Mendeecees then reportedly stepped forward once more, closing the distance just enough to make everyone tense again. According to viewers describing the moment online, it felt less like one big explosion and more like several smaller ones building at the same time. He warned in a calmer but serious tone that they needed to stop and not continue down that path, making it clear he believed things were getting out of hand. Bambi, however, stayed still and unshaken. She didn't back down or lower her energy. Instead, she seemed to challenge the moment head-on, asking what would actually happen if she didn't stop. That question reportedly hung in the air with no immediate answer, and the silence that followed made the tension even more noticeable. People in the room appeared uneasy, as if everyone understood that whatever came next could change the situation completely. Yandy then physically stepped between them with her hands out, trying to create space and regain control. In a louder, more urgent voice, she told both of them to stop. But even then, according to those describing the scene, it didn't feel fully under control. Her body language showed strain, tight shoulders, a tense expression, and constant eye movement between both sides, as she tried to hold the situation together while emotions kept rising around her. At that point, it reportedly felt like more than just an argument breaking down. It felt like everything around it was starting to fall apart too, not just between the main people involved, but in how everyone in the room was reacting. There was no clear side anymore, only confusion and tension spreading quietly across the space. Bambi then pointed toward Yandy and said that this was exactly why people stay silent. That comment shifted the mood again. Yandy, already emotional, shook her head as tears began to form. She responded that speaking up is exactly what leads to moments like this, her voice breaking as she insisted she wasn't trying to make things worse. She pleaded for understanding, saying she was only trying to stop the situation from escalating further. Bambi pushed back immediately, questioning what worse even meant in that context, and suggesting that ignoring problems is part of the issue itself. Mendeecees let out a frustrated breath, briefly looking away before responding. He argued that what was being said wasn't fair, and that the situation was being reshaped in a way that didn't reflect reality. Bambi, however, stood her ground and insisted she was simply calling things out as she saw them. After each exchange, there was that same heavy silence, short pauses that made everything feel even more intense. It wasn't loud or chaotic in those moments, but the stillness itself felt uncomfortable, like no one knew what would happen next. Yandy wiped her eyes quickly and tried again to steady herself, repeating that this wasn't how things should be handled. But by then, it was clear she was struggling to keep control of the situation as emotions kept rising on all sides. Online, clips of the moment quickly spread, and viewers immediately began picking sides. The conversation moved fast, turning the situation into something widely debated, with tension and strong reactions replacing any calm discussion that might have existed before. Reactions to the situation quickly split people down the middle. Some felt Bambi had gone too far and that certain things shouldn't be said in that kind of setting. Others believed she was justified and simply speaking her truth. But beyond opinions and outside reactions, the moment itself was really about three people caught in a situation that had clearly gone further than anyone expected. As things began to settle slightly, the tension didn't disappear, it just became quieter, heavier. Every pause, every glance, and every reply still carried weight. It didn't feel like the argument was ending so much as shifting into something more controlled, but still very tense. For a brief moment, the room went still. Even small sounds felt amplified in the silence. Mendeecees Harris looked away, then back at Bambi, and that small movement alone added to the discomfort in the room. Bambi remained exactly where she was, steady and composed, as if she had already said everything she needed to say and wasn't interested in backing down or softening her stance. Mendeecees appeared to be weighing his words carefully, trying to decide how far things should go from there. His jaw was tight, his hands moved slightly, and even without speaking, his frustration was clear. He eventually said in a low, firm tone that a line had been crossed. Bambi immediately pushed back, suggesting that maybe that line needed to be crossed in order for the truth to come out. Throughout all of this, Yandy Smith stood between them, trying to hold things together. But instead of just trying to mediate, she now looked emotionally drained, as if the weight of the situation was catching up with her. Her shoulders dropped, and her hands slowly lowered as she struggled to keep her composure. With a trembling voice, she asked why they were even in this position to begin with. Yandy reportedly said that things were never supposed to turn into this, but no one responded right away. That silence only made the moment feel heavier. In the background, a few people began murmuring again, quietly, not enough to interrupt, but enough to keep the tension rising. According to viewers describing the scene, The room started to feel divided without anyone openly choosing sides. Some people looked toward Bambi, others toward Mendeecees, but no one stepped in to fully take control of the situation. Bambi then continued speaking, her focus still locked on Mendeecees. She pushed back against the idea that she had crossed a line, questioning how she was supposed to know where that line even was if it was never clearly explained. Mendeecees reportedly let out a short laugh, but it didn't come across as amused. It felt more tense than anything else. He responded that she knew exactly what he meant and shouldn't act like she didn't. Bambi immediately challenged him again, telling him to say it clearly instead of hinting at it. That simple demand changed the energy once more. According to those discussing the moment online, that request, to say it out loud, felt heavier than anything that had been said before. The room seemed to pause again, as if everyone was waiting to see whether the next words would finally make things fully explode or finally settle down. At this point, it reportedly wasn't just about what was being said anymore. It was about something deeper being brought up in a way that many felt was too intense for the moment. Yandy Smith briefly closed her eyes, almost as if trying to block it all out. When she opened them again, tears had formed. She repeated softly, "Please stop, this isn't helping anything." Bambi, however, kept her focus on Mendeecees and replied that it was helping her, saying she was done staying silent. Mendeecees then reportedly stepped to the side and began pacing slightly, trying to release some of his frustration without letting it spill over. His tone stayed controlled, but noticeably tighter. He told her she didn't seem to understand what she was doing, and insisted it wasn't as simple as just speaking and walking away from the consequences. Bambi immediately asked him what it actually was, pointing out that from her perspective, things only seemed to work when people stayed quiet. That question reportedly stretched the silence again, making the room feel even more tense. Yandy, visibly overwhelmed, took a small step back, no longer trying to stand directly in the middle of everything. According to viewers discussing the moment, this was when it became clear she could no longer manage or contain what was unfolding. Mendeecees eventually lowered his voice further and said that what was being said was causing harm, not just making a point. He emphasized that real people were being affected by what was coming out. Bambi, still steady, reportedly pushed back and suggested that maybe she was exposing something that needed to be seen, rather than creating the problem itself. Bambi reportedly responded without adding much more, and for a brief moment, both sides just looked at each other in silence. That silence, according to those describing the scene, wasn't calm or peaceful. It felt heavy, filled with everything that had already been said, and everything that was still left unspoken. In the background, someone whispered that things were getting bad, and another voice replied that it already had. Yandy Smith, visibly overwhelmed, took a shaky breath and wiped her face again. She admitted she couldn't handle the situation anymore, saying softly that she really couldn't deal with it at that moment. Even so, she didn't fully leave, remaining there as someone caught between emotions and responsibility, watching a situation that had clearly gone far beyond a simple disagreement. After a pause, Bambi asked again in a firm voice what would happen next, whether everyone would just pretend none of it had happened. Mendeecees didn't respond immediately. He looked away, then back again, as if carefully weighing his words. When he finally spoke, his tone was still controlled, but less reactive than before. He told her to think about what she had said and the impact behind it. Bambi replied after a brief pause, stating that she had already made her decision and leaving it up to him to decide whether he stood by his own position as well. At that point, the energy in the room shifted again. It wasn't quieter, but it became more still, like everyone had stopped expecting resolution and was simply waiting to see what would happen next. Yandy eventually stepped back, creating more space between herself and the others. She looked exhausted, both emotionally and physically, as if the situation had drained her completely. In a low voice, she said that this wasn't over, not directing it at anyone in particular, but making it clear she understood the moment would extend far beyond that room. Bambi didn't respond. She just stayed there for a moment longer, letting the silence settle over everything that had just unfolded. Bambi eventually shifted her stance. Slightly, no longer leaning forward but also not stepping back. She just stayed in place, steady and firm, as if holding her ground without adding anything more. Mendeecees also remained where he was. His expression was still tense, but his movements had settled. It looked like he had pulled himself back from the edge of reacting further, even if the tension hadn't fully left him. Something had clearly shifted between them, even if nothing was openly resolved. The room itself never really returned to normal. Instead, the energy changed into something quieter, but still heavy. There were no raised voices anymore, no sudden reactions, and no one rushing to step in or lighten the mood. Even attempts at distraction or forced laughter were absent. It felt like everyone understood that what just happened couldn't simply be brushed off. Bambi finally let out a breath, though it didn't feel like relief. It felt more like release after holding tension for too long. The atmosphere stayed charged, just in a calmer form, less loud, but still present, like something that would linger with everyone long after they left the room. Yandy Smith reportedly took a small, hesitant step back, her hands dropping fully to her sides. According to viewers describing the moment, she looked completely drained, like the emotional weight of everything had finally caught up to her. Her breathing appeared uneven, and her expression carried both exhaustion and frustration. Online discussions later compared the scene to the aftermath of a storm, where everything looks still on the surface, but the damage is already done underneath. For the first time in a while, Bambi reportedly turned slightly toward her and said that none of this was what anyone wanted. Her tone softened a little, though she still stood by her position. Yandy responded by shaking her head and wiping her face again, suggesting that maybe this is what happens when issues are left unspoken for too long. Bambi countered that it might also be what happens when those same issues finally come out all at once. Yandy, however, replied that it could just as easily mean things were made worse instead of better. That final line reportedly lingered in the air. No one immediately followed up, and for a moment, the room stayed still again, heavy, quiet, and unresolved. And for once no one hurried to dispute it in the background. Instead, a few people began to move again wearily and slowly, as if they were attempting to get back to normal without really addressing what had just transpired. There was still a lot of enthusiasm. Even though some people picked up their phones and others whispered to one another, fans later characterized it as a room that felt entirely different yet having the same appearance. Mendeecees changed his position, stepping back a little to give himself a little more space. It was obvious, even though it wasn't spectacular. "You said what you needed to say," he finally muttered, his posture loosening just enough to indicate that he was no longer pushing forward, but his countenance remained tense. "I already knew that," Bambi gently retorted. "Now you've got to deal with everything that comes with it." There was something about the way she said, "I'm not scared of that part," that caused people to pause once more. It was straightforward. Rather than combative or defensive, Yandy gazed between them again. Her countenance troubled as if she had already accepted whatever would happen. She whispered almost to herself, "I just wish this didn't happen like this." However, nobody could provide a response. Fans on the internet continued to respond as new conversations circulated because deep down it seemed like this moment had been developing for a long time, and regardless of how it happened, it was always going to come out someday. It's claimed that the altercation revealed the true depth of the tensions, emphasizing that feelings don't get that intense without a past. Although it wasn't yet about public opinion, others contended that the issue had gone too far and that some discussions should have taken place in private, away from cameras and public pressure. Bambi shifted her stance slightly, no longer leaning in or pushing the moment forward, but still refusing to step back. The energy in the room had clearly changed. It wasn't as explosive anymore, but it still felt firm, like everything had already been said, and she was no longer interested in repeating herself. Mendeecees remained in place as well. His expression had settled into something calmer than before, but still serious. The earlier tension hadn't vanished, it had just shifted into a quieter form, one that didn't need raised voices to be felt. Yandy Smith eventually took a few hesitant steps back and turned slightly to the side, creating both physical and emotional space for herself. It was obvious she needed a moment away from the center of it all just to process what had happened. In a low, tired voice, she said she needed a second. Yandy reportedly said she needed a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. No one tried to stop her, and no one followed as she stepped away. That space she left behind still felt heavy, filled with everything that had just unfolded but wasn't resolved. For a brief moment, it was just Bambi and Mendeecees left in that tense silence. Neither of them spoke. The quiet wasn't empty. It carried everything that had already been said, along with everything that still hadn't been addressed. Then, almost at the same time, both of them shifted slightly away from each other. It wasn't a dramatic exit or a clear ending. Just small, subtle movement, but enough to show that something had changed between them. After that, the room slowly began to ease back into motion. People started talking again in low voices, trying to process what they had just witnessed and make sense of it. But even as conversation picked up, it was clear that nothing had truly been settled. Online, viewers continued debating the moment. What was said, what actually happened, and what it all meant. Some took sides, others questioned everything, and many kept replaying it to catch details they may have missed the first time. But for those who were there, it wasn't about who won or lost. It was about how quickly things escalated, how intense the emotions became, and how a single moment shifted the entire dynamic in the room. And even as things moved forward afterward, it was clear the impact of that confrontation didn't end when the voices stopped. It simply marked the beginning of everything that would be talked about next. Some viewers feel Bambi was justified in speaking up and standing her ground, believing she was finally saying what needed to be said. Others think the situation crossed a line, especially given how emotionally charged and public it became, and feel it could have been handled differently. Mendeecees' reaction is also being debated. Some say he was simply responding under pressure in a tense situation, trying to defend himself and keep control of the moment. Others believe his responses showed he was also overwhelmed, and that the situation escalated too quickly for anyone to fully manage. As for Yandy Smith, many people feel she was put in an extremely difficult position, caught between emotions, loyalty, and trying to calm everything down. Her visible distress and hesitation made a lot of viewers sympathize with her, as she seemed stuck in the middle of a conflict she couldn't fully control or resolve. Overall, the situation has left fans divided and still asking questions. Was it just a heated argument that got out of hand? Or is there more to the story that hasn't fully come out yet? And as with most viral moments, people are expecting more details, reactions, and interpretations to surface as the conversation continues online.